So today I want to talk about why speech. Mm, It's a very important principle in Buddhist practice. It's one of the Eightfold Paths, why speech. It also appears in the ethical training precepts to not engage in false speech. And it feels timely to me. It's always a timely thing because we spend so much of our life in communication with people. Um, but also feels timely because of what's happening in the news, and there's a certain quality of the tenor of the communication that's definitely not wise speech. We spend so much time speaking, but often it's just sort of on an autopilot. And we bring that thing that we're doing all the time into more awareness and conscientiousness that really helps us in our spiritual practice. Um, Sometimes speech is just compulsive, like maybe not so much in these circles, but people can't stand silence. And if it's silent for too long, you just blurt out whatever comes to mind. And this is how family reunions go sideways. My training as a lawyer, I learned very early on that if you just are silent, especially in face-to-face communications, that many times the other side will just start making concessions or giving you information because silence is so uncomfortable. Um, our words have such capacity to be, healing and uplifting and inspiring, um, and also to be so destructive. So the Buddha gave a very like kind of specific, enumerated guideline for what constitutes wise speech, and that's mostly what I want to talk about today. It's a four-part test. I thought there were five, but I only have four written down here, so maybe the fifth one will come to me if there is a fifth one. Um, is it true? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? And is it timely? Is it true? Is it kind? Is it beneficial? Is it timely? So truth, this is a very important principle in Buddhist practice. It's um, so many reasons, like to speak the truth, you kind of have to know the truth. And the path of practice is often seen as uncovering the sort of hidden truths of the nature of experience, the nature of this world that we live in. A seminal teaching from the Buddha is the Four Noble Truths, again, highlighting the importance of this idea of truth. Uh, the Buddha is sometimes referred to as the one who spoke the truth. It's like this kind of like the truth that sets you free. It's that idea of like truth being and at the time in ancient India, the Vedic influence, truth was seen as almost a kind of divine energy that kept the universe in balance. So this was the context in which the Buddha lived and created this path. So there's a story of a young man who invites his very religious, very conservative mom to come to dinner at his new apartment, and the mom just can't help notice that his female roommate is quite attractive, and the way they're interacting, she kind of feels like there's something going on here, and the son can kind of read her mind and see that she's observing this and says, Jenny and I are just friends. There's nothing happening here. We just this apartment's really nice and we can only afford it if we're roommates. So she says, okay, fine, kind of like whatever kind of attitude. And then a few weeks go by, and Jenny is talking to the young man and she says, you know that ladle that we were serving the soup with to your mom? I can't find that ladle anywhere. You think your mom did something with that ladle? He's like, I don't know, but I'll call her and ask her. So he calls his mom and he says, Mom, I'm not saying you did anything, but we can't find the ladle. And we're wondering if maybe you put it somewhere. The insinuation was like maybe you took it, but he's being he's being kind. Um, the mom says, Son, I'm not saying that you're sleeping with Jenny or you're not sleeping with Jenny, but if Jenny were sleeping in her bed, she would have found the ladle by now. So to speak the truth, you have to know the truth. We have to step out of our box of concepts and ideas and opinions and biases. And uh, and the truth is very slippery these days. It's very hard to know what is true in the external world, but we're cultivating this ability to know what's true in the internal world, certainly. To step out of the trance of thinking and step into a kind of connectivity with, sometimes they say that like the suchness of this moment, just to be able to connect with how is it in this moment, what sensations are present, what emotions are present, how's the energy moving in the body. And the idea of truth is that, that this practice unveils the immediate truth of how things are in this moment. And over time, a kind of illuminates the truth by kind of exposing the falsity of some of our beliefs about the world. And even if they're our beliefs, like, the classic insights that we talk about in meditation. Things are always changing. Nothing lasts. Things are impermanent. And we all know this on an intellectual level, but we fool ourselves. When things end, when things go away, there's grief, and that could be a longer discussion about like I have a sense that there's something in this animal body that needs to grieve. At least that's the way I've experienced it. But the sense of surprise or the sense of like indignation when things change, even though we know that things are always changing. Um, sort of like extra suffering that we bring on ourselves for not living in some kind of harmony with this basic truth that's around us all the time. But we just sort of are in this trance of thinking everything is very like sort of solid and reliable and steady. The other classical insight is to see that there's no kind of lasting satisfaction from conditions, because again, conditions are always changing. Uh, you just sit down to meditate and, you just notice like all the things that could be better in this moment. It's sort of the nature. It's never quite right. It's sort of like my feeling of like right now it's about 3 degrees too warm in this room. And and so much of like if you pay attention to your motivations for every thought, deed, action is really about like turning the dials to try to get it just right. And so the maturity comes when we realize like, there's some things within our control. Like if I were really hot, I would take off the sweater. But so many things outside our control. And we can either be in resistance or opposition to them, or we can develop some kind of way of relating to that experience in harmony. And then the third kind of classical insight is that we see that it's not so personal. You know, there's a kind of common humanity to anything you've experienced, anything you've gone through. The dark night of the soul kinds of experiences are thousands, millions of people have gone through or will go through. We're not being singled out for our measures of difficulty or grace for that matter. Actually, you can begin to see that what I'm talking about, not self, but it makes much more sense for me to talk about it as a self as an activity, selfing, this like movement to want to be somebody, a particular kind of person, whatever it is we want in life, a certain status or certain, you know, the funny one, the smart one, the wily one, whatever our values are, then you like, and then the project of life becomes like, how are we measuring that? How are we measuring that in comparison to our own expectations? How are we measuring that in comparison to other people? And that measuring is a kind of recipe for suffering. I'd have told this story before, but I was giving a talk at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, and it's a retreat, so people are kind of dialed in, and it's like 110 people in the room. So um, one could be nervous. I wasn't nervous. I'm used to that now. But I walked into the hall, and somebody kind of motioned to me and like wanted to tell me something, and I bent down and they whispered in my ear, "This better be good." And I laughed. I thought it was pretty funny. And then all of a sudden, this energy of, oh my God, what if this is not good? Like I was really like uh, a credible amount of anxiety. Like, I get this like thought proliferation of, oh, like I'm going to be the one that gave the terrible talk. It's going to go down in history. People might leave. It'll be so bad. And a lot of selfing. I was actually able to identify that as unhelpful selfing. I was like taking birth in this idea of like being a good teacher, and in a way that was just causing me stress. And in that moment, like the recognition is the main thing, because usually, like if I hadn't been in that setting, even when you're teaching on retreat, you're practicing several hours a day. So like more mindfulness is stronger. There's more clarity about what's happening in experience. But once we identify that that's happening, there's some clinging here. There's some like reduction of who I am to some measurement against some ideal, then it's quite easy to regulate, actually. You know, just in the way we talk about re-regulation as part of meditation practice, bringing awareness, a kind of gentle, loving, kind awareness to the thoughts that were happening, to the anxious energy, a little bit of fear, and then the somatic sense. And inevitably, uh, the body regulates. Just as if I were to run across a field, I know with 100% certainty that I'll catch my breath. I don't ever think it's always going to be like this. But sometimes when we have these strong energies or fears or emotions, there's a kind of subtle idea like it's always going to be like this. And actually, one of my takeaways from that experience is like, of course, we could have an aspiration to rest in a kind of equanimity, to be solid and steady. But maybe more realistic in this topsy-turvy world is like just the ability to regulate, the ability to see when we've gone out of balance and re-regulate more quickly is almost as good as not ever coming out of balance, and maybe more realistic. So the truth is associated with integrity, ethics. This is also a very important part of this path of practice. Um, some of it is just being like a having a heart of goodwill, being a kind person. Like when you're a person, when I know you to be a person of integrity, then you're giving me like the gift of fearlessness. I don't have to be on guard. I can actually relax. It's like so important, like to be able to actually have a place where we can just relax and not worry about someone trying to take advantage of us or exploit us in some way. And then we give ourselves, when we act in integrity, what the Buddha called the bliss of blamelessness. And I love that idea, because like I can feel how uh, told a lie or done something that's like a little around the edges. There's a kind of energy that comes with that, a kind of like whether it's worry about being caught out or something deeper, like a sense of like conscience or like how we like when we're not acting in integrity, the body will tell us. This is when I was a child. I first time I went to India at the age of 4, I had a really hard time with food. I was a very Americanized kid, and even though my parents cooked Indian food, the Indian food in India was quite different. And I don't remember this, but my mom says I called it sketchy. And so the thing is that you go and you're visiting relatives, and the only thing they'd want to do is feed you. It's just constant. Like we spend a whole day, see 3 different family members or friends, and then you just keep getting fed. And I couldn't do the food, and there's no saying no. Like it's just part of the culture that you have to be fed. So I concocted just like a web of lies about uh, things I was allergic to, like. But what I didn't realize is that they all talk to each other. So pretty soon I was allergic to pretty much everything. And even as a child, I felt the kind of the stress of that, like um, yeah, I felt the stress of that. So it's just like being in integrity is like part and parcel of being like a good-hearted person, a person of goodwill, that we are caring for others through our acting in integrity. And there are maybe incomprehensible karmic consequences to actions that lack that integrity, maybe beneath our ability to detect, but that's the view, at least the oh, another reason uh, truth is considered so important in that era is that they didn't use a lot of paper. They had written language, but the paper wasn't very good. This is why for years, hundreds of years, this was an oral tradition. People memorized the teachings, chanted it, carried it out. So because they didn't have good paper, they also didn't have written contracts. So a person's word was everything. Like the well-functioning society depended on people being trustworthy and truthful. The adherence to the value of truth seems to be absolute. If you read the teachings, it's like Musa Veda, where I mean, don't knowingly engage in false speech. So it brings us to this sort of, for me, slightly murky area of white lies. Um, how do you like my cooking? Or the classic, do I look fat in these pants? And to my knowledge, there's nothing really, there's no like loophole or exception or story that sort of illustrates it. But there are a lot of stories where the Buddha did not respond. That silence was sort of the answer to uh, a lot of things. Um, and there's a story that comes from the Buddhist world about a monk who goes to a king, and the king has a very ostentatious, kind of gaudy, over the top palace. And he's just like a monument to his ego that he had all this wealth and riches. And so the king asked the monk, "Doesn't my new palace look magnificent?" And the monk says, "Your Majesty, it reflects the grandeur of your heart." So you can speak the truth in a way that's not insulting. There's also a sense of like, I have this sense of, this is like me talking that like these little white lies, these little exaggerations we might have to build ourselves up or to feel part of a group, small deceptions, um, are a kind of slippery slope for the patterns of the mind, like once you've told this small lie, it's easier, it can kind of amplify in itself. And maybe even more importantly, it's a kind of barrier to intimacy. Like if even if the people that we're close to, we have these like little deceptions, then we can't show up in a way that's really authentic and be ourselves. And so there's this sense of separation that it creates. So speech should be truthful, then it should be kind. This is expressed in many ways in the teachings. Speech that is agreeable, pleasant to hear, straightforward and gentle in speech, not harsh, not divisive. Uh, it's fairly straightforward, like again, it's part of that, like the whole path of practice is about being a person, a non-harming person, being harmless in the world, revering life in a way that you don't want to cause harm to other people. But it's so easy to say something in reactivity, and so easy that energy of aversion or that energy of self. Somebody says something that's kind of insulting, and the words just sort of like really want to come out. Um, which is why having a like resource of mindfulness available, so that we, in the mainstream mindfulness world, they say that the space between stimulus and response, that like it's like a moment of pause, a moment, maybe a moment of reflection. Like it's this, it could even be this metric. Like, is this thing I'm about to say, is it truthful? Is it kind? The next one will be, is it beneficial? And there's a, recently I said the wrong thing in the wrong environment. I was actually teaching on a retreat and I told the story, and it wasn't that great a story. And people were very upset. And it's a strange dynamic because like I am up for a difficult conversation. You tell me about like some area where I'm lacking awareness, or inadvertently said something that was harmful, but we're all in silence. So I'm just getting like anonymous notes with lots of exclamation marks. Um, so this is where it's like really helpful to be, have some humility and, make an apology. I made an apology. It was sincere. I was sorry for harm that I caused. Um, and there's a feeling that I had of like, it was kind of like just like a pain right here, solar plexus that was, which actually in the Buddhist worldview is considered to be very wholesome. Like this, like it's called like moral regret. That actually by tuning into the painfulness of the thing we done, it conditions us to be more careful the next time around. And I noticed that what this was happening, it was happening as I was giving the apology. It happened for like a day and a half, just every time I was in the hall, just this like pit in the stomach. And the first instinct is to try to push this away, or calm it down or something. But it's actually, the Buddha called this a guardian of the world. That feeling that we feel, even though it's very unpleasant, is like so important because I'm certainly never going to tell that story again. But like hopefully it will temper all my speech in ways that's helpful. So is it truthful? Is it kind? Not harsh? Not divisive? Is it beneficial? So, um, there's an acronym from the mainstream mindfulness world that's WAIT. Why am I talking? I like to consider like, is this an improvement on the silence? Like, so much of our speech is not improvement on the silence. Like Gil Fronsdal says that, when you speak, you're stealing someone's samadhi, so it better be worth it. Like someone's like concentrated mind is being captured. So certain kinds of speech are just categorized as not beneficial. So slander and gossip. Um, Slander has a kind of ill will in it, and slander is usually like it's not true. You're saying false things about people, so that kind of makes sense. Gossip, um, maybe has ill will in it. It's so seductive to like. Gossip is the kind of thing that like there's a moment where you might actually feel uplifted, like at least I'm not that bad, whatever the comparison that the mind's making. But then I've noticed this more recently that when I hang out around where gossip is happening, or if I'm engaging in gossip, which I try not to do, um, there's a point at which it turns and it just feels kind of like yuck, like slimy in some way, like just not something you want to be associated with. So tuning into that moment can be really helpful. Um, Idle chatter is considered to not be beneficial. Um, and I don't think I do this that much, but some people will just talk just because they're silent or just because that's just what they do. Like, I'm sure we've all been around people where you're just getting a dump of every thought that's coming through their mind, and it's just coming outward. It's just like considered to not be beneficial because it's not helping that person, like pay attention to their mind and be aware of this and do some practice to regulate it. And also just hard to hear sometimes when people are just like, or sometimes it's anxious energy. And people just like talk. It's kind of like as a kind of coping mechanism. I'm not a huge fan of small talk, but small talk is interesting because it can be idle chatter, but it also can be very beneficial in terms of like forging a connection with someone or developing a relationship. I used to kind of just discount small talk as being frivolous, but you got to start somewhere, especially with a stranger. So, um, really like tuning into the motivation. A lot of this is about the motivation for why am I talking? And then is this beneficial? Like some kinds of conversations, the other person's not interested, they're not up for it. Not in, you know, I grew up in Alabama. I have lots of friends who have very different political views from me. Very few of them are up for like an authentic, honest, vulnerable conversation. So it's not beneficial. Um, some people get really upset when you try to have a conversation like that. So it's not beneficial. It can like endanger you in the wrong environment. So have to assess whether it's beneficial. And then the deeper sense of beneficial that is a through line of the practice, which is it leading to the alleviation of suffering for myself and others, or both? Causing more suffering for myself. So really, again, paying attention to the motivation for this speech. It's speech intended to be healing, to communicate something important, to forge a connection, to build intimacy. One of the monastic rules at the time, I don't know if it was a rule, but it was kind of a saying at the time of the Buddha, was that uh, there's only two activities in terms of speech that a monk should engage in. And one is Dhamma discussions, so discussions about the path, and the other is noble silence. Like pretty narrow. Like if you're going to commit your life to this practice, you're either going to be in dialogue about the teachings or you just be in silent meditation. This is in harmony with the idea wise view, where we discern what's wholesome, what's unwholesome, what leads to suffering, what leads to affliction, and like, try to orient our life in the direction of the skillful, the wholesome, creating positive karmic impacts. And then the last one is it timely? In some ways, this is the most important. Is this the appropriate time for this speech? Because this allows for, speech that is truthful, kind, beneficial, but disagreeable to hear, like a hard truth that needs to be communicated. And when you're in that place of like needing to communicate a hard truth, then the calculus becomes, is it the right time to do that? If a person's in a lot of reactivity, it's probably not the best time to give them constructive feedback. But really important, because sometimes people get the idea that, oh, you should be kind all the time and, like put a nice face on whatever it is. But there's an acknowledgement that when the norms of culture or space or society are being violated in some way, uh, and the benefit might be to prevent that harm from occurring. Benefit might be educational, that there is a way to have those difficult conversations. Just pay attention to the time, not doing it in a when there's a lot of energy in the field. Do you do it privately? Do you do it in community? Um, and I've seen it go both ways. Like sometimes it can be very helpful to be given constructive feedback in a community that can hold that, or having a witness that can hold that. And sometimes it's just better to do it privately. So this is my synopsis of the teaching, but I've been sharing a lot of the teachings in this space, so I thought it'd just be interesting. I'll end with either the six case studies that the Buddha gives. And the Buddha referred to himself as the Tathagata. That was the name that he gave himself. And hopefully this is not word soup, but I'll just share it with you. In the case of words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, unendearing, and disagreeable to others, he doesn't say that. That's pretty clear, like didn't meet any of the criteria. In the cases of words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, unendearing, and disagreeable to others, he doesn't say it. So it's not pleasant to hear and it's not beneficial. Don't bother. In the case of words the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, but unendearing and disagreeable to others, he has a sense of the proper time for saying them. That's the hard truth. Hard to hear that, but it's important. In the case of the words that the Tathagata knows to be unfactual, untrue, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he doesn't say them. Yeah. This is a lot of what I see happening in media. People are saying all these things. They're not true, they're not factual, they're not beneficial, but people like hearing it. In the case of the word that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, unbeneficial, but endearing and agreeable to others, he does not say that. So anytime it's not beneficial, it's like an automatic no-go. In the case of the words that the Tathagata knows to be factual, true, beneficial, and agreeable to others, he has a sense for the proper time for saying them because the Tathagata has sympathy for living beings. Um, and just, there's a whole other talk connected to this, which is about listening, but I'll just tell you one story from that. So there's two trucks kind of back to back, and the truck driver is struggling to get this huge crate from one truck to the other, and really grunting and groaning, and he's not making any progress. So somebody's passing by and says, he needs some help, and he's like, yeah, that'd be great. And the two of them like huffed and puffed and struggled and groaned, and the thing was not moving. And then the passerby said, we're not, there's no way we're going to get this off the truck. And the driver says, good God, I don't want it off. I've been trying to get it on. The importance of listening. So I'll stop there and just open the space to any comments, reflections. I find it actually quite interesting to contemplate under what conditions I'm more likely to engage in unwise speech. Yeah, we'll get a mic for you so that the people online will also be able to hear.
Now I forgot what I was going to say. Um, I just wanted to make an observation that I've noticed, for so long, and I always was one of those people who did not like the silence, that it was uncomfortable for me.
Yeah.
And as I've practiced and learned and been taught that to insert a pause or be silent, it has great rewards. It really does. And it just doesn't matter if you're silent. It's okay.
Yeah.
But I was curious what you think. Why is it that it's a human condition that we can't stand that silence? What is it? Do we think people are judging us? What is it?
I'm sure that's part of it. I have a lot of opinions on that. One thing is that it's a very anxious world we live in. Uncertainty, and probably always has been, because I shared last time I was here, the Buddha talked about being afraid in an unstable world. And um, so when we're just ramped up like that, that energy has to go somewhere, and speech is an easy way for that to go. And maybe we feel a little better if we voice our anxieties to people. I also feel like we don't, the inner world is very scary for a lot of people. They actually did these interesting experiments where they would hook someone up to electrodes and they would shock them. And they would say, evaluate that shock in terms of pain. And they would say it was sufficiently painful that people would pay some amount of money to not be shocked. And then they put the same people in a room and they said, you're still hooked up to the device, and there's this button here. If you push it, you'll get shocked. But we just want you to sit here for 15 minutes and do nothing. Sure. Sometimes the prompt was be alone with your thoughts for 15 minutes. And 50% of the people shocked themselves. There's like this sense of like, I'd rather endure some pain than whatever it is to be in, like, confront the midst of your experience. One guy shocked himself 180 times. Like, that guy's really good. So I think it's just like it's unfamiliar territory. We don't have a culture that at large where people will just sit quietly and contemplate and pay attention to their experience. So it's Annie Lamott said, uh, my mind is a dangerous neighborhood. I wouldn't go there in there alone. It's that kind of sense of, I get that sense from a lot of people. When I teach beginning classes in meditation, this is almost always something that someone will observe, that like it's chaos in there. And maybe we don't know, maybe one of the ways of coping with that is just to stay busy, and talking as a form of busyness. Oh, over here. Actually, say your name also when you speak.
Hi, I'm Dandelion. Just kind of like resonating and building on what the two of you were just talking about. I do feel like a lot of my interior speech, if I actually pay attention to it, is like not beneficial or kind. And
Yeah.
ambiguously true, but like actually hopefully not true in a funny way. And I guess in some ways it seems easier to be quiet externally, where there's like a definite physical action to not speaking, than to be quiet internally.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you have to share on that point.
Yeah. I mean, being quiet internally just requires more dedicated practice and more kind of like it's work to cultivate a inner landscape that's appealing. Um, some of what happens when we meditate is that the energy is rebalanced. Like my example of running across a field, like we're not taking in information or stimulation so that we can move from a fight flight mode that we're often in to rest digest mode. And when we have less energy in the body, it's easier to like sometimes those thoughts just don't come as much, or we can just be more aware of them. But sometimes we call this the inner critic, or the thing that I have found the most helpful is to recognize when my thoughts are unkind and to befriend that voice. Because even though it may be harsh, or it's like a coach that went too far, or like, like somewhere there's a part of you that's trying to keep you safe or has some good intentions. It's just that the approach is not right. And so for me, befriending that has been much more helpful than trying to get rid of it. So then those thoughts show up and like at some point they just don't have an impact. You're not getting involved in them or engaged with them, and not affecting you. And then those thoughts come and go. But it's not easy, especially in a world with so much stimulation and so much encouragement to think. Oh, yeah, over here.
My name is Alex. Yeah, so I was just wondering if you could say a little bit about the meaning of Tathagata.
Yeah, Tathagata is the name that the Buddha gave himself, and it might be a play on words because Tathaga means the thus come one. So like he's come into awakening, he's come into the truth. It's like that's just a way of talking about the attainment of awakening. But Tataga means thus gone. So it's thus come and thus gone, depending on how you read it, and which is maybe a play on words to point to a kind of non-dual existence, not coming, not going, the stillness within movement, movement with a stillness kind of idea. Oh, it's an interesting idea that it's like named for himself as a little kind of tongue in cheek, but also pointing to, profound depths.
Thank you.
Oh, oh, here.
I have a question, or maybe it's something I'm kind of challenged by within Buddhist practice. And it's around speaking up or speaking out. And I feel like there's a tendency that I notice to go more inward and not to act.
Yeah.
And the relationship between being able to do wise speech or wise action and actually like do the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And to have like strength and kind of moral integrity in the choice. So I had like a really visceral reaction to the kind of like kind or peaceful, or is it pleasant? And I've done a lot of activism and organizing. before, and it was at a time where I actually was like much more distant from my Buddhist practice because I felt that there was like almost too much of a call to be inward, and that there's like a real courage to lean into what's difficult.
Yeah.
And the unknowns of how useful, beneficial, or safe speech or action might be. And I'd love to hear your comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really important reflection. There's an old joke. How many Buddhist practitioners does it take to change a light bulb? And the light bulb never gets changed. There's a lot of noting darkness, darkness, darkness. And, it can be like that. Like someone needs to change the freaking light bulb. But we can become comfortable with the darkness. And a lot of my friends are practitioners or even teachers and also wear activist hats. And I think the thing that I've noticed is that people can get burned out, and it feels to me like it's the energy of aversion that's burning them out. And that's where I think the practice can be really helpful. Like, I mean, I see all of this as preparation for being able to go into the world and do what we want to do with more balance, with more ease, with more integrity. So I think we have to find our own personal balance there, and I've worked with people who are working in social justice, and that's the thing, is this, like, there's just so much aversion. It's understandable because things that they are fighting for, or against, are deeply troubling. But I think we just burn ourselves out. I think they describe aversion as a kind of inner fire. Like we just burn ourselves out if that's the only fuel we have. And so for me, the job of the social advocate and on the path of practices, can you move the motivation from aversion to compassion or love, which is a enlivening and generating, not easy to do, but a good aspiration. The Buddha was a tremendous, you could say, social justice warrior. He would try to stop wars. He tried to talk kings out of invading, and he wasn't always successful. But in one story, he just like marched out onto a field, knowing that a battlefield, knowing that both sides respected him, and so he's able to stop the fighting like that. He went against the mores of his culture by refusing to acknowledge caste. There's even one story where a bunch of people are being admitted to the monkhood, and a lot of the people are like from his clan, his like cousins and relatives. They were like noble people, and then there are people of lower caste, and he instructed his disciples to ordain the person of lower caste first, so he would be senior to all those other people. Like these little things like that, that was kind of like a more humorous example, that he eventually allowed women into spiritual practice, which was very had to be cajoled a little bit, but he very against the culture, and we say very progressive, especially for the time. So I don't think the two are incompatible. And in this discussion, it's the timeliness of the and can our message be a message of that's more agreeable to hear? Like, can we present our arguments in a way that people want to listen or motivated to listen? Yeah, but I think it's a really, really important reflection. Our practice is out of balance. We don't talk about this a lot, but if you read the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha's discourse on mindfulness, 13 times in that discourse, it says mindfulness should be internal and external, and both internal and external. So it's like the engagement with the world is just as important And really a kind of a way of like, can we engage in the world in the same way we engage with the inner world, like is encouraged. Yeah. Yeah. Pass the mic over there.
Hey, Gulu.
Hey.
Thanks for all the time you spent preparing and facilitating today. Following up on what you just ended with, I had never heard that WAIT acronym before. And as I've reflected on it, to me, an additional acronym of WAINT is really important, which is why am I not talking?
Yeah, right.
And I thought of another acronym of COJT, which is COJT. Come on, just talk.
Yeah.
And it's not much of a question, but I found myself on a webinar today, or a working group today of people doing social justice-y things in response to the stuff happening in DC. And I really had a moment of wanting to share, and I didn't. And I really wish I had that WAINT kind of message going on.
Yeah.
Because normally when I, get over the fears, I'm like, oh, I am still breathing. So anyway, thank you for the acronym and the spin-offs that happen.
Yeah, I'm going to borrow that. This happens sometimes. Like it happens more on Zoom, where I'm trying to have I'm teaching a class on Zoom, and I'm trying to have like discussion, and it's just crickets. It's like, why is no one talking? And sometimes it is just a feeling of safety. It's like, I think it's a little bit easier. Like, we can feel each other in this room in different ways, but yeah, and am I witnessing? This happens a lot in spiritual communities where people are witnessing things that are not okay, but there's just not speaking up. Have to have the courage to speak up. Oh. Thank you.
I think I come from the other side, where my intention now, I'm trying to use this to be kinder. I tend to speak up and have been seen as critical, overbearing, smarter, that stuff like that. So we're working to be kind, to be quiet, and run into the situation where put in contact with someone. It's a stereotype. Is my wife's best friend's husband. And housing them in the fire. So we are a week together. So I really, and what a wonderful opportunity to practice my practice, to be kind to this person, because this stuff. And somebody, I would say professionally, has a problem with self-critical reflectiveness. Personally, I say they can't smell their own poop, and in no way. So there is no time to tell the truth, which is kind, useful, or timely. So shut up. And I try to get rid of as much as I can with practice, but it's still there. And the line, I was listening, I was glad to hear the exclusions, the Buddha saying only this and that, but the line between kindness and fraudulence in that kind of relationship, I still find very, very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I say with, like kindness is a skill that we can develop, specific practices like loving kindness practice to develop this capacity for being kind, or really having an attitude of it's like the inner attitude is almost more important than what we do with it. Sometimes in the metta practice, we say, fake it till you make it. So I think there is some kind of benefit to that, as long as you know you're faking it, and that faking doesn't just become like, oh, well, no, people like that, or like just like so nice that it's kind of sickening and it's just over the top.
So
Then,
kindness trumps truthfulness.
I think they're on par. I think kindness, truthful, kindness, and beneficial are all on par, are all
But see,
required.
when there's tension between truthfulness and kindness, when what is really true and I can't get rid of it, I can't meditate away, is going to hurt somebody,
Yeah.
then being kind is more important than being truthful.
Well, the Buddhist just said he wouldn't speak. The Buddhist said he wouldn't speak. The Tathagata wouldn't speak in those circumstances. He'll only speak if all the conditions are met.
But you get put in positions where you can. I mean, it's not always, let's all go to dinner. Don't you want to go to dinner next week?
Yeah.
Well, really, I don't know. And, there's no way of not speaking that. You either go or you don't go.
But you can be kind. Thank you so much for the invitation. That's so generous. I'm not eating out that much these days. I'm on a special diet. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But I thought those are things that I tell people. I actually am intermittently fasting. So unless we're having dinner at 4, I'm out.
Doesn't always work.
So we do our best. It's all aspirational. Yeah. Oh, someone online who was it that had their hand up? Marlene?
I did, Gullu. Oh, whoops.
Carmen. Hi.
Hi, Gullu. Hi, everybody. I was so glad that you said that about gossip. I'd been thinking of working on gossip, I guess. And I'd been noticing that when I get into environments where gossip starts, I'd been noticing like such a strong pull to get involved. And it was beyond just wanting to connect with other people. It's like, the Vedana was very pleasant, it was just like, it's titillating. And I'd been listening to Norman Fisher read his book about training and compassion. And he has this, one of the axioms, and he says something about like if you don't talk about other people, basically, you'll win friends and influence people. He just says, it has like this magical power because people don't even know why, but they will trust you and want to be around you if you don't talk about other people. And I was just sort of contemplating that, and it's just interesting. And I liked how you said that it just turns at some point. I'm going to pay attention to that. There is that balance of, if I'm talking about other people, it wakes up that part of the brain to say, when I walk away, who's going to be talking about me, or in some other parallel space. It's like harder to let go of, And then the last thing I want to say is about small talk is I feel like some people, when their intentions with small talk, it's like it can actually feel like a hug, If somebody's really good at not try, but if there's an art to small talk when it's done with an intention of inclusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I think it has an important sort of like softening the edges.
Yeah, that's great. Something to reflect on. The thing about like, anger is another example of something that has very pleasant Vedana at the beginning, but then it turns, but I call it a honey-tipped arrow, an arrow with a honey tip and a poison root. It's so seductive to get that surge of empowerment and adrenaline that for me, the training is like, don't even go there because I know it's going to turn. It's like, some food that I might really like that doesn't agree with me. Like I just, like at some point you just say, okay, I'm just not going to do that because I'll have to pay the price. Oh, oh. You had a comment over here?
I was going to respond to the kindness.
Yeah, let's just get you on the mic so people online can hear. Hold it close.
Yeah, in response to the kindness question or comment, I guess, I think that there's a way to expand your or our understanding of what kindness is. And I think there might be a tendency to define kindness as maybe like comfortable for the other person, or conflate kindness with beneficial for the other person, that kindness cannot hurt somebody. Because that was the hesitation I heard, was like, if I cannot say something that is kind. I'm trying to remember the wording that you used. Fear of sharing something that may not be kind because it may cause somebody discomfort or hurt. But I, in my own mindfulness practice, yada, yada, have been trying to understand the separation between like acting with integrity and acting with kindness in your own moral compass, and accepting that you do not have control over how that is received. All you can do is ensure that you are acting in internal kindness to yourself and to others, and accept that that may have an effect on someone else that is different than your intention.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We don't control other people. If we know them well, we might know the landmines and avoid them, but
right. And so checking in like with yourself, is this from a place of kindness truly?
Yeah.
To myself, to them? If yes, I think it can count as kind, even if it might be unpleasant.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's that case example where it's truthful, it's spoken with a kind heart, might be disagreeable to hear, but is beneficial because you're not having to do something you don't want to do that's going to cause you misery. So just doing it at the right time. Yeah. Great. Thank you, everyone. I always appreciate it when people are engaged, and I don't have to use the acronym WAINT, which I'm going to use on this group that I'm teaching tomorrow night. You've all heard me, many of you heard me give this spiel many times. These groups are offered freely, and it takes a lot of financial resources for this place to even exist. I was on the board of InsightLA one time, and it's staggering how much happens even in the simplified version of things, how much happens in the back office and how much it costs to have a place where we can just sit and do nothing. So your contributions are greatly appreciated. Most of my livelihood comes from the generosity of communities like this. And you were given an opportunity to make a contribution when you registered. If you did, if not, there's the possibility to do that now with various methods, and someone can help you if that's helpful. And I think I might be here next week. I'm here soon. So I'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.